we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time here, welcome to the show. As I like to say, we always like to we explore everything from sports to psychedelics. And if you want to support the podcast, go check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Also check us out on Twitter at the Bigmark Pod, and on Instagram at the Bigmark Podcast. And again, I love hearing from you guys. So if you always want to comment or do anything like that, let me know. And you know, if you ever want to hear a new topic or anything like that, just let us know. I got C-Pup, I got Christian Aubin behind the cam here, helping us out big time. And today, you know, it's me sitting down with you again, and we're going to talk a little bit about steroids. Again, you know, something that's kind of come up, you know, adjacently in the podcast in the past, but I watched one of my favorite documentaries of all time the other day called Bigger, Stronger, Faster. Tremendous. Mike Bell, shout out Mike Bell, I know you're watching. Tremendous filmmaker. He made another great documentary called oh my gosh, check it out. Check out Mike Bell documentaries there, Christian. Sorry about that, folks. Sorry Mike. Something about pharmaceuticals. Really interesting guy. He grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York. Family of a few brothers, and yeah, he makes really good movies. And again, Bigger, Stronger, Faster, Tremendous. Did you find it there, Chris?
Yeah, one called Phasmophobia. I don't know if that was the one that you were talking about.
I'm not sure. It's something about like pills, kind of.
Yeah, you got Bigger
prescription something. Anyway, it's kind of,
yeah, it was called Prescription Thugs.
Prescription Thugs. I knew it was a cool play on words, like prescription drugs, but it's all about like the prescription drug industry and pushing things heavy duty. Really interesting. But again, you know, this documentary kind of transcends athleticism and does all things. And you know, one of the things it talks about, it kind of says, and this is what we'll talk about a little bit more today too, is the fact that, you know, people's heroes, athletes, models, you know, actors, people, you know, even comic book characters, they're not kind of all what they seem. And you know, we really look up to these people, and they're people that we idolize. They're important to us. They inspire us, right? It's an ideal to work towards, you know, these bigger than life athletes and actors and stuff. And you know, they've kind of become our modern gods and heroes of myth and legend. That, you know, Joseph Campbell and the hero of 1,000 faces, these archetypes do exist in our minds, in our collective unconscious, if you will. And again, we'd love to see the final product, but there's something about how the sausage is made that we don't really want to know. And when it comes to sports, it's also a big cheating thing and everything. We'll get into that a little bit more. But essentially, you know, for someone that we've looked up, for instance, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? You know, a guy from another country comes to America. He's a bodybuilder. He starts getting into movies and acting. Next thing you know, he's the governor of California, right? Like, unbelievable. You know, no one really saw anyone like him before, and they just thought, wow, this guy has amazing genetics and God-given ability and all this stuff. And he's openly admitted to using steroids. So it's kind of one of those things where it's really difficult to ever achieve certain body images, if you will, without the use of steroids, which is really interesting. So again, we'll kind of go into that a little bit deeper. One of the biggest things as far as steroid use is, you know, steroids in athletics, in university sports, in high school sports, hopefully not much sooner than that, but just in sport in general.
Pee-wee.
You know, kind of a lot of reasons why athletes are taking them. You know, one of the biggest things, steroids, and this is like when I say steroids today too, I might also be talking about kind of any performance enhancing drug or PED that's out there. There's a lot of things that are not anabolic steroids that also make your performance better. Certain sports, actually anabolic steroids potentially might hinder your ability to do well at that sport. So we'll go into some of those other drugs too as the podcast goes on. So stay tuned. But again, in the documentary, Mike Bell, one of his brothers, was actually playing in the NCAA. He's a university football player. And he said anyone on the team, not everybody, but anyone on the team worth their salt, actually playing well, starting or doing better, was taking steroids. And it was really the big truth about steroids too is it's more of a recovery aid. Yeah, it helps you in the moment to do certain tasks and get stronger, but the fact is the way physiologically the way your muscles actually get stronger is when you work out, you tear some of that muscle fiber. Some of that muscle fiber, there obviously is space to grow now because you've torn this muscle fiber, and your body kind of fills in those extra spaces, and that muscle that was smaller now becomes bigger. So there's a certain amount of trauma that's actually happening in your body, but then your body comes in, and especially if you're working out extremely hard, like at the level of elite athletes, you need that extra boost to recover. And there's so many other things, guys are taking protein powder, creatine,
BCAAs,
pre-workouts, BCAAs, love BCAAs, all that stuff. But yet we draw this line at steroids too, which is super interesting. Maybe it's because you have to inject yourself, but it's also been made in an illicit substance too. And it's kind of like, we'll question that a little bit later too. But essentially, the biggest issue with steroids in sport, really, when it comes down to it, is it's an ethical concern. And the fact is that if everyone is doing steroids at the elite level, and I want to play at that elite level, now I have to do steroids to do it. It essentially removes my choice to do steroids or not by me choosing to partake. Now I have to do steroids. So that's the part of it that's actually technically unfair. Because so many people potentially are using the steroids, it might not be cheating. It might just be leveling the playing field in a certain sense, but it's exclusionary to other people who are just trying to get in the sport. And we've talked about this many times on the podcast, how exclusionary sports are already with these academies, and young kids are going, why? I don't want to play basketball 7 days a week. I love basketball, but I don't want to do it that much. Why can't I just play high school and we just play twice a week? We practice and we have fun. Why do I have to go away to a school? Maybe I have to live there. Maybe I have to play with these guys that are also super sick and crazy competitive and just wanting to do the best. Like, there's only so many spots available, right? Like, at the end of the day, not everyone can be an athlete, which is sad. But this is, I think, unfortunately, what these kids are contending with today is like, you either have to be a pro or just don't play sports at all. Where back in the day, it was totally cool to just play sports because it was fun. And then once you graduate high school, then you move on. But we've slowly kind of removed, and even in university, I feel like the university athlete maybe 25, 30 years ago was a little bit more casual than today's university athlete, where, and I've said this before, I feel like the nerd has now become the cool kid.
For sure.
Where the jock used to be the cool kid, and now it's flipped, right? With technology coming out and video games and all that stuff is now cool.
Like crypto and all these things, right?
Crypto and all that stuff that used to be like nerd stuff is actually cool now. Even comic books.
For sure.
Right? Like, yeah, it's
Pokemon.
still nerdy, but the movies are huge, and it's like, now it's flipped because it is the revenge of the nerds, Jocks and guys and people like that did beat the shit out of them and acted like shit, and now Bill Gates is the man, right? And some of those guys that stuff Bill Gates in a locker are probably coaching a football team in like, like a high school football team or something, who knows? But not to say that there's still obviously all those benefits we've always obviously all talked about athletics, but it's just become exclusionary, which is an issue. And where maybe more of that kind of intelligentsia is kind of a little bit more wrapped up, and that's what everyone's kind of focusing on these days. Anyway, so that's the biggest thing. Again, you don't want to kind of have to take steroids if you don't want to. You don't want to have to inject a needle into your ass just because you want to play a little basketball, right? So let's get real. Some of the biggest things about steroids back in the day, MLB, like the Major League Baseball, that's one of the biggest things ever. That's baseball and steroids and, Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds, that whole thing. It's some of the biggest early 2000s. That's what baseball was all about, late 90s. Roger Maris, back in the day, 1961, hit 61 home runs. He beat Babe Ruth, and he held the record for 37 years. So this is presumably pre-steroids, right? Because historically, we'll get into this a little bit more. Historically, steroids have kind of been around since the 40s. German scientists and Russian scientists kind of developed it for soldiers, and then Russians started using it in their athletes post-war. But anyway, 37 years later, 1998, Mark McGwire hit 70 home runs, and then Barry Bonds in the same year hit 73. So those guys, actually years later, Jose Canseco wrote a tell-all book admitting 80% of the major league was taking steroids. And he personally, Jose Canseco personally injected steroids into Mark McGwire. So like these guys were on steroids, like factual. And in 2005, U.S. Congress, the senators and everybody spent 151 days in session, and 8 of those days were spent on the steroid issue in Major League Baseball. They considered this more important, that they spent more time on the steroid issue than national health care that year, why the levees broke in New Orleans, and ending the war in Iraq. They spent more time talking about steroids than those 3 issues that year. Because
that's like double the time of how much they spend going back to Iraq or pulling out of Iraq.
Yep. Because this is how important steroids in baseball is to Americans. Right? So again, it's an important issue, again, fairly localized to America, because probably no other country would necessarily consider this, but it's just so important to them. And again, the question remains, why is it so important for these athletes not to be cheating in their eyes? You know what I mean? Is it about the cheating? Is that really what it is? Is it? Or is it about something else? I don't know. Again, a little bit more about the history in steroid use in the Olympics, because basically to this day, and there's a great documentary called Icarus. Christian and I were just talking about it before. Icarus, brilliant documentary, talks a lot about the current doping scenarios that are happening in the Olympics. And it basically started back in the 50s. Russia and USA were obviously competing. The space race was happening. They were trying to get to space, and Russia was kicking the shit out of the US. In the space race, they got Sputnik up there and all those cosmonauts, and they were dominating in the Olympics. And it was all because of steroids. Because in the late 50s, a Russian coach actually got drunk, and he was with the U.S. Weightlifting coach and told them that the Russians use steroids. He's like, yo, we use steroids. We use testosterone. And I think at the time they were using like straight pig testosterone.
Yeah, or like
it
horse
wasn't even
stuff.
synthetic. Yeah, it was
Right.
like, I think it's pig, because actually pigs' anatomies are really, really similar to ours.
To humans, yeah.
Like their digestive system, like almost everything, even their skin and stuff is like really, unfortunately. But yeah, like, so the first testosterone used was just like straight up testosterone, and who knows what the Germans were using too, but they were working more on trying to figure out synthetic testosterones. But once the US team heard about this, literally the coach ran back and like they developed an even better steroid. And then they started going it in the documentary in Bigger, Faster, Stronger. They actually talked to the old U.S. Olympic coach who would have been coaching back in the 60s. And he's like, yeah, we all use steroids, but we never saw it as cheating. He just said we thought it even Steven because everyone was doing it. And like, you weren't going to win unless you were doing it, because you can't get humanly strong enough unless you're, again, there is a genetic component to this, folks, but it would have to be it's so rare for you to be so genetically predisposed to having more testosterone that just injecting you, like, you can get so much stronger, especially using it in the right way, than not, right? Your body just can't recover quick enough, right? So one of the biggest things with steroids, obviously, as we all know, is is the negative view of steroids, and a lot of that has kind of come from steroid propaganda, unfortunately. And it's really interesting. The documentary kind of hints at the fact that potentially this whole oh my god, Olympic runner blames pork burrito for positive sex. Hilarious. Where's she from? Russia?
Olympic runner Shelby.
What country?
Houlihan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing.
Sorry, girl.
Yeah, sorry. U.S. champ.
She's from the U.S. too.
Yeah. Okay.
Whoopsie. You should have went to Burrito Boys, man. They got the good shit. They got the high test steak and shrimp.
It's just so crazy though how they'll go to this extent.
Well, it's funny. I'll tell you in a second actually about because I was just gonna say the probably the biggest reason why the U.S. started this whole fixation on steroids is when did Ben Johnson have his medal revoked? I think it was in the 80s. So I'm killing the segue, folks. My bad.
1961.
Which Olympics? 84, right?
84, yep.
So at the 1984 Olympics, Ben Johnson was a Canadian sprinter, actually won. He beat this American sprinter named Carl Lewis, and that Ben Johnson had his medal stripped because he was found using steroids, and that's basically what sparked this whole idea that no way a Canadian sprinter could have beaten an American unless he was using steroids. However, Carl Lewis was found to have a stimulant in his system as well, but the IOC actually invented, or actually I think it was the US Olympic Committee actually invented this term called inadvertent use, and it was just like that burrito.
Right.
And he just said it was like an herbal supplement or like a cold medication. Crazy. But it was like a full-on stimulant. He's a sprinter. Okay, let's get real. So potentially that's when this whole fixation on steroids started, is the fact that, all right, this exists and people are trying to use it to cheat. And there's just something, again, this is a little bit America focused, but there's something kind of un-American about cheating. And they just look at it and these people expect these people that they look up to and they idolize to be perfect. And I think that's the big displacement, and that's the big, it's almost that delusion that exists in the States that we're number one. Meanwhile, the real statistics are showing that you're far from number one in most categories that are positive, right? So there is this delusion, and especially it's especially rampant in sports. I've mentioned this before with sports psychology conferences and stuff, where certain topics you can't even bring up in American conferences because the Americans' viewpoint is sports are wholly good. And maybe this is it. Maybe that is the true reason why people get so fired up about the steroids, is the fact that they want to just keep the sanctity and the holiness of sport like precious and untainted, and want to say, yeah, sport is wholly good, but nothing's wholly good. Nothing is wholly good, right? Anyway, some of the steroid propaganda over the years is as I like to call it, one of the biggest cases, pro football player named Lyle Alzado. He used to play for the Raiders. He was one of the biggest badasses in football. He actually got brain cancer and like inoperable, really bad brain tumor, and like lost all this weight and kind of wasted away. He did all these interviews with Maria Shriver, who actually went on to marry Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he did all these interviews with her about that his cancer was caused by the use of steroids. And every physician who's ever looked at that case say there's no correlation between his inoperable central nervous system cancer and steroid use. And there isn't. There's like scientifically, there's nothing. Maybe other types of cancers, but not brain cancer. Right. So, but the mainstream media spun this whole thing that steroids killed this guy. Right. And it was interesting. Chris Benoit, did you remember that? He was a wrestler. Do you remember that whole story?
I do remember Chris Benoit.
Friggin' this guy
went nuts.
Chris Benoit, WWF, WWE wrestler, lost it probably due to CTE.
Too much.
This is the thing. No one really knew about CTE back then, but they blamed it on steroids. He lost it and he murdered his family, kids and wife and himself. And just and everyone was like, because of the steroids melted his brain. But the guy was, he was a high flyer too, man. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with wrestling out there, but Chris Benoit would be flying off the top rope, just getting insane head injuries. And that's the thing. A lot of the worst concussions you get aren't necessarily from head on head, tete-a-tete. It's like literally smashing your body. Like the biggest concussions in hockey come from getting checked into the boards because you're like whiplashing. Mm-hmm. You're going like choo, choo, and like hitting the ground and stuff. Same in football. It's not necessarily literally taking a hit to the head. The guy was dieseled though, clearly on juice.
Oh, Jack.
So look at these. This is the thing. It's like, yeah, he was on steroids, but why are we blaming this one instance? Like, you'd think the whole WWE would be doing this. All those guys are juiced to the max, right? Because they're basically just like, look at this guy. Literally, we're just looking at pictures here, folks.
We'll put the picture up in the cast. You guys can see.
Guy's absolutely flying through the air. Everyone on YouTube can see. But if you're just listening, he's full spread eagle above the ref's head. Yeah. Amazing. And then one of the more interesting stories is Taylor Hooton. So he was this young kid in Texas, I believe. And actually, when I was at Western, the Taylor Hooton Foundation actually came and did this big, huge presentation. Yeah, there he is. So this kid was like an all-star pitcher in his state and stuff, and he ended up committing suicide when he was still in high school. And they found out that he was on steroids, and they blamed it on the steroids. Meanwhile, he was also taking an antidepressant at the time that no one ever talks about, and it was actually an SSRI. And that those are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that a lot of people who have taken them and stopped taking them abruptly have experienced serious suicidal tendencies, but no one ever talks about that. And again, this big, huge presentation, all of the athletes in Western were in our big auditorium, huge presentation from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, and just talking about don't use steroids. This is what can happen. And it was just like, literally all of us are sitting there going like, what? Mm-hmm. Like, and I had heard about this before, but I was like, what about this? You know, again, no one mentions other things that were happening in his life, but they fully blamed. And this gentleman, Taylor Hooton's father, actually went in front of Congress during those hearings, and he told the story of his son, and that trumped all the scientific. That's what everyone said. All the doctors involved in those hearings, it trumped all the scientific literature. Nothing that any of the doctors could bring that was scientifically logical could ever outweigh the weight of this father coming and telling the story of his son killing himself because he used steroids. Again, interesting. But this is that thought that no way, you know, anything else could have been going on in his life that would have caused this. It had to be just the steroids. But interesting, this is the propaganda that kind of does float around, and it leads people to kind of look at these drugs in the wrong way. And in no way am I necessarily saying go out and take these steroids, but I'm saying like no drug is inherently bad, you know. No gun is actually going to shoot anybody sitting there. You have to pick it up and load it and shoot and point it at someone and pull the trigger, you know. And it's just like Barry Bonds didn't just inject steroids in his ass and go hit 73 home runs, right? He went and trained his ass off too, and was skilled. It's just the fact that he knew that's what kind of pushed him over the edge. One of the great doctors in the documentary, Bigger, Faster, Stronger, Dr. Charles Yasalis, really cool guy, sports medicine doctor. He opens up a lot about the fact that, you know, steroids have been used in medicine since the 1930s. They've been used in muscle wasting cases, burn victims, cancer patients, recovery from surgery, AIDS, and the fact that how does this drug have cognitive powers? that it works for these sick people, but yet it starts to kill these athletes. So like, what is, where is this? Something isn't lining up. And AIDS, especially, look at Magic Johnson. Why is Magic Johnson so dieseled? Because he's probably on anabolic steroids, because it's phenomenal for your T cells and it keeps you strong. Where AIDS makes you weak and fucking kills all your immune system, this anabolic steroid is going to friggin' pump it up. And there's testosterone replacement therapy for older men now. A lot of them are using it, and they're not experiencing some of the kind of aging effects that usually happens when your testosterone production starts going down. So again, really, really interesting. Again, the fact that basically, if anyone's ever seen Reefer Madness, it's very silly to watch. Reefer Madness came out, I think, in the 30s. It's all about weed, and it's like this crazy, over dramatized. Like, they make it seem like if you smoke weed, you're becoming like a lunatic and like start like stealing money and like robbing liquor stores and like grabbing women and stuff. And we look back at it and we see it kind of silly. And I think we might look back at this time too and look at especially steroids, but a lot of other drugs too, in this certain way, that it was with the best intentions that certain doctors and some of mainstream media tried to say, hey, don't just go out and just do steroids. Like, there is some effects, like it can go bad. There is a way you can abuse it. It is a drug of abuse. You can get addicted to the way it makes you feel. So you can go bad, and there's guys you've seen the guys that just inject like 30 in it, and their friggin' biceps are huge, but they have like little skinny arms and it's all infected, and just like, again, it can go bad. So the intentions were there, trying to say, hey, this isn't as bad, or sorry, this is way worse, and people shouldn't just do it willy-nilly and this and that. But they've gone really far with it, and it's overblown and dramatically misrepresented, right? And again, I've said it before, but I look at steroids like the guys who do it in sport, they just want to win more than me. I don't look at it like, oh, I wish I could do it. I look at it like, man, I don't love my sport that much. This guy who's doing the steroids to play the sport better, it loves it more than me. I don't look at it like, oh, screw this guy. I look at it like, this person is dedicated to being the best they can be, because you can't, especially if your genetics aren't set up for it, you just can't get you can't get as strong as you can with steroids. Let's just put it that way, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a truth. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not condoning it and I'm not advocating for it, but we just have to look at some of this stuff and say, and it goes for psychedelics too. We have to start looking at some of this stuff in a real context and say, listen, the reason we hate some of this stuff isn't because of the drug itself, because the drug doesn't have a mind of its own. The reason we hate it is the way it affects society, or the way people, right? Exactly. The way other people look at it. Precisely. We don't ban peanuts because a few kids have peanut allergies, right? We put warning labels, right? So why don't we start doing that with other stuff? Yeah, obviously in elementary schools it's kind of banned, but we don't say no more peanuts in the whole world, right? Like, go to Thailand, good luck, right? So, to paint steroids with a little bit more reality, common side effects are hair growth for men and women, testicular atrophy in men, clitoral enlargement in women, voice change can happen in men and women, acne, cholesterol levels can go up. Men can get like gynecomastia, or like bitch tits, like tits basically, because essentially that comes from, because men have like natural estrogen levels and stuff, and women have natural testosterone levels made in your adrenal gland. Anyway, but we just have way more because we have testes, so we have way more testosterone. But we also have a little bit of estrogen. So when our testosterone levels go way up, our estrogen levels try to go up to meet it, because they kind of act in this like give and take manner. So all of a sudden, guys tend to all of a sudden have this like rush of estrogen, and that's what kind of gives them like these bitch tits, literally. And then for women, menstrual problems too. Almost all side effects reverse, But some of the side effects for women don't reverse. So sometimes the clit stays big, and sometimes, the voice stays low. I don't know if you've ever heard like a woman that has taken steroids before. She kind of sounds like this, and it kind of stays like that. And it's just because her vocal cords get like thicker, kind of. You know what I'm saying? One of the biggest side effects for steroids is oral steroids can actually cause liver issues. And the weird thing, too much testosterone can cause these issues, but too little testosterone is also an issue, right? So this is this weird relationship, and like some women get like little bits of testosterone like injected in their system because again, it's a hormone. I should have mentioned this before, but again, testosterone is a hormone, so it's a signaling chemical in the body, and most of what it does is it signals the body to break fat down into energy, and it helps you build muscle. So it's wicked. It's like but too much of it again has certain side effects, and again, the oral doses can affect the liver. And again, people like to talk about roid rage and stuff. Really, statistically, only about 5% of the population get roid rage. But it's usually the fact that you're probably already an angry person, and it's going to make you, it's just going to, like, if you're already an asshole, you're going to be a super asshole when you take the steroids, right? And they say, like, it might make you bald. There's no evidence in making you bald unless it runs in your family, and it might make you go bald quicker. So again, those are some of the common like bad side effects everyone kind of talks about, but for men, at least, most of them, they go back, right? Like once you stop taking the steroids, and that's the idea, is that you cycle them. You don't take them straight forever. You have to kind of let your body adjust and relax, and doctors can figure that out. Man, some guys at the gym probably have a good enough cycle regimen that you're going to be healthy. And as long as you flush your liver and do all that stuff, like it's not as harmful as everyone kind of says, right? We also let people do a lot of risky behavior apart from this. Why are we taking the stance with steroids that this is where we're drawing the line in the sand? You can't do this. It's an illicit drug for everybody, not just athletes. Like, why are we not allowing these people who just want to work out in the gym and just want to look good? Why do they have to become criminals just to do that, right? Because of sports? Like, all right, I guess. But again, maybe it came from that Ben Johnson thing. Great documentary to watch about all that. It's called 9.79 with a little asterisk on it. Most of the steroid documentaries have like a little asterisk by it just because like it's like steroids, I guess. Anyway, but again, an overwhelming majority of the steroid user is like a gym rat. So we're preventing these people from just doing their thing. It's interesting. It's like, we let people jump out of planes. We let people swim with sharks. We let people do certain other drugs too. And it's interesting when the government kind of decides when and where to kind of step in. And again, most of it surrounds sports, right? Because we just don't want to see people cheating in sports.
Regulation. Because
again, like I mentioned before, we want to see sport as wholly good. We want to see these athletes as semi-gods that don't do no wrong, even though a lot of them have issues at home and domestic abuse and crime, and maybe they've been through the shit and they're raised in some crazy atmosphere. They just happen to have an amazing skill, and that's got them out of that adversity, and now here they are, and they're trying to just figure out, now I have all this money, what the hell is going on? But we raise them up on a pedestal, right? And there's so much pressure on these guys to be perfect and do all this stuff, and it's like, we just assume all these guys because we only see them as an athlete on the field. Especially football players, you don't even really see their face. It's just like once you start to actually learn who it is, who that person is, their name on the back of their jersey, that illusion starts to slip away. And especially Americans, they can't really accept that. And I think that's what this is all about. Again, like I mentioned, steroids aren't necessarily the easy way out. They're viewed as the easy way out, but you do still have to train. like I mentioned, in my opinion, it's more you have more will to win than I did. Like I've mentioned, I never saw one guy on my team ever do it on any of the teams I ever played for. But if anyone did, like I said, they just wanted it more than I did. It never came into my head. I knew it was legal. We were getting drug tested all the time anyway. It never was offered to me. I was always a big enough guy anyway, but I couldn't imagine some of these other guys that were struggling, trying to keep their weight up, trying to get stronger, trying to do that just naturally. I guess I'm blessed with my genetics. You know, shout out Lithuania, because there's only basketball players and powerlifters that come out of Lithuania. So hopefully any of that's coming from that heritage.
Giants.
Right? All that stuff, right? And, you know, consider what if something comes out that's better than steroids, right? What are we going to do then? And there's something out there, right? It's basically, so it's now we're going to start to get into gene therapies and changing up genetics, but essentially, it can happen through natural mutation, but there's something called myostatin inhibition. Have you ever heard of these cows? Mm-hmm. There's Belgian blue bulls. Maybe we'll throw a picture of the Belgian blue bull up for everyone on YouTube. But everyone listening, it's basically these cows were born with a mutation that their body doesn't produce this myostatin protein. Essentially what the myostatin protein does in the body is it tells your body to stop building muscle at a certain point. And because bro, they look like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, they do.
Right?
They're seeping out the seams. Like their skin is about to
jacked,
pop.
Right.
Yeah.
Because their body doesn't concern itself with making fat. It just concerns itself with making muscle. So they have very little body fat and double the muscle mass of a normal cow. So consider geneticists that are working on trying to do this with humans, right? What are we going to do then? We're going to have these genetic enhanced humans running around with double the amount of muscle, just born that way, potentially. What are we going to do then, right? Just ban these people from sport in general? Are we going to have an all myostatin inhibited Olympics? Right? You know, what are we going to do here? Right? And again, there's been other issues too, even like with all these drug testing and all this shit. There was a sprinter in the Olympics. She was born and raised a woman, found out that she had testicles like inside and was a man because of all the testing. Because the Olympics actually test whether you're a man or a woman.
Wow. Based
on your testosterone levels, I'm pretty sure. So like, this is the stuff that I talked about that in my ethics course. Like, that potentially, like, could ruin your life or, like, at least completely shatter your current worldview just because you want to run in the Olympics.
Right.
Like, it's insane. But, again, what are we going to do then when there's even... And up until now, I guess before the use of steroids, we did kind of rely on genetic mutations and people who were just like, again, I'm obviously genetically different. So like, that's why I got into sport. And throughout the years, that's what kind of drove people to sport. But if we can choose how humans' genetics actually turn out, you know, what are we going to do then? Right. It's just everyone who's not genetically enhanced. We just can't play sports now. I don't know. It's interesting. You know, we look at it like cheating, but look at other forms of cheating, right? Like, quote unquote cheating. Tiger Woods got laser eye surgery. His eyesight's 20/15. It's actually better than human, like normal human vision. And in a game like golf, that should be seen as an advantage. But no one looks at that like cheating, right? No one says that's cheating. Interesting. Cortisone shots. I had one myself. It's a corticosteroid. It's technically a type of steroid, but everyone says, oh yeah, Kurt Schilling got in a 25-minute cortisone shot last night. Sorry, I'm showing my age, Kurt Schilling reference. You know, like, you know, LeBron James got a cortisone shot in his ankle. No one bats an eye. He's like, okay, now he's going to play tonight. Right. So one of the biggest things in like endurance sports isn't so much steroids. Again, we're kind of talking a little bit more about performance enhancing drugs, but endurance sports is all about your blood oxygen carrying capacity, how much oxygen your blood can carry. So what you can do to actually increase that is increase your red blood cell count. So your red blood cells are actually the cell in your body that carries oxygen to all the places, right? It's a little, you know, hemoglobin molecule can actually hold 4 oxygen molecules on it, and it can bring it around, right? And you can increase that 4 different ways. You can increase your red blood cell 4 different ways. And the International Olympic Committee, or most doping committees, consider 2 to be legal and 2 to be illegal, even though all 4 do the exact same thing. So you can, the 2 legal ways is altitude training. So you can go train in Denver at the U.S. Olympic training facility, which is at Mile High City.
Yeah, it's like it's a type of like
It's at
oxidization,
altitude.
right?
Well, it's because there's less oxygen at altitude. Your body increases the red blood cell count to make up for that. And then once you go back down to sea level, you have all these extra red blood cells, so then you can breathe better. So you can do that, or you can use an altitude chamber. So you can like sleep in like a chamber that's like depressurized and stuff. However, the 2 bad ones is EPO, which is erythropoietin, which is a type of drug that you actually take, which increases your red blood cells, or blood doping. If you've ever heard of that, it's a very common term. Blood doping essentially is they take your own blood, take it out, like 100, so it takes about 120 days for your red blood cells to grow. So they take that out about 120 days before your competition, and then they re-inject that same blood, your blood, back into you before the comp, and then you have all these extra red blood cells in you because you've just added extra blood, right?
Yeah.
But that's considered illegal.
How? It's your own blood.
Again, right? So, and all it is increasing your red blood cells, which you can do the other 2 legal ways. So really interesting. Floyd Landis actually got his Tour de France revoked because they said he was on the EPO. You actually would have that Tour de France that was revoked for him was given to the 2nd place cyclist, even though he did have some ties to doping. In fact, you would have had to go to the 23rd placed cyclist in that race to find anyone that had nothing to do with doping. So like it's out there, it's straight. So why do we start to pick on certain people, right? I think they're just sacrificial lambs, just to say, hey, we're still looking out, and it's just their examples that the governing bodies of sport just have to pick someone from time to time and say, hey, you're busted, you're done. Like John Jones in the UFC.
Right.
Remember they were finding picograms?
Yes.
A picogram, like you and I probably have a picogram of steroids in us because we drink tap water.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's if you test our blood right now, you'd find traces of antidepressants in our bloodstream, even though we don't take it because we drink in tap water.
Right.
And that's, now you have tests. That's another thing. The tests are becoming so sensitive that people are getting busted when they didn't even do anything. Or maybe they took some protein powder from a place that didn't clean the tanks after they did some weird run, or who knows. But now, again, the testing is getting so sophisticated, and you know, people are just getting busted and being, again, I think they're being used as examples for sure. Another thing too, acceptable versus unacceptable drugs. You know, Major League Baseball stadiums are sponsored by alcohol companies, but yet they're all pissed off about steroids. There's cigarette ads. Right. You know, what about Adderall? It makes you better studier, makes you better journalist, makes you do your job better. No one's looking at that like cheating, like it's steroids. Like we got to get rid of it and go in front of Congress for 8 days, talk about Adderall. Beta blockers for people, for performers, musicians or whatever. There's lots of competition with musicians. There's auditions and what have you. You take a beta blocker, you shut your adrenaline off, you're going to go out there like you're not even nervous, right? And a lot of musicians, like symphony musicians, they're not big on performing in front of a lot of people, right? They get nervous. And any musician, any performer, you get nerves. But if you didn't have any of that, who knows how much better you could potentially perform, because you're not even thinking about how your body's feeling. Porn stars using liquid Viagra. Obviously not a lot of morals to begin with in the porn industry. But hey, like, these guys aren't just fucking staying hard for hours doing these shoots. How do you think that it's not just natural, but it's fucking with people's heads? Being like, oh, I'm fucking whatever. Again, they're cheating, quote unquote cheating, using performance enhancing drugs. Go Pills in the Air Force, American Air Force, uses amphetamines. It's actually the only military in the world so every other military in the world bans the use of amphetamines. The U.S. military requires the use of their Air Force pilots to use amphetamines to stay awake. And actually, I think in like late 2000s, two American pilots got charged with the murder of a bunch of Canadian soldiers because they made a split decision that a lot of the experts said was probably it's indicative of someone on speed, like a snap decision, and they just fired on these Canadians. They thought that they were insurgents or whatever the hell they call them. Insane, but totally accepted, right? So super interesting. It also speaks to this whole steroid issue. It also speaks to the kind of the 21st century shift in preoccupation with body image. You can look at the way kids' toys have kind of evolved. You look at G.I. Joes. You look at one from the 60s, the guy's a little skinny dude. You look at one from today, the guy's dieseled, crazy six-pack, seeing everything, right? Even like little toys, right? Like guys, like movies, television, comic books. Captain America was a scrawny weakling. That's his whole thing. And they literally juice him up with the super soldier serum. His whole thing, he's a juice head. He's a big, roided out soldier. But everyone loves, he's freaking Captain America, right? And his whole thing, they showed in the movie, the needles go in. Like he gets juice. It's pure juice. And, like we look at these guys like they're jacked and we see that as like, that's the new male ideal body. You have to be dieseled.
Full on.
You can't
12-pack or you're not
have to be or like and like huge too. Like you have to be like John Cena. You have to be like Dave Bautista.
Like Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
You have to be a wrestler.
Yeah, you gotta be a rock.
Legit, right? And we romanticize steroids, right? Like, it's blank on steroids. It's the electric car on steroids. It's the economy on steroids. Like all this stuff, it's romanticized. And we just look at it like, again, it's this magic potion that if you just take it, you drink it, and then all of a sudden you become this monster. It's Jekyll and Hyde. It's that whole release the inner beast and stuff. And, again, that's not how it works, but movies, TV, magazine, they all tell us that that's what a real man is. And there's something so wrong about that. Let alone Photoshop, before and afters. A lot of I used to read those muscle magazines when I was first working out because they used to have wicked workouts in them and good nutrition advice too, actually. Shout out Muscle and Fitness. But right? But a lot of those before and after photos, they're actually done in the same day. Literally the guy stands there and sticks his gut out, looks sad, bad lighting, maybe doesn't shave yet, and then after shave, put the friggin' tanner on, look big, smile. Again, literally they do the before and after in the same day. And again, Photoshop, all that stuff. Literally, there's these dudes peddling these supplements in these magazines, cut up, dieseled, and they're saying, you take this protein powder, you're going to look just like me, let alone the guy is sauced to the gills. And again, talk about the supplement industry. It's unregulated. It's basically snake oil. They have this whole concept of the proprietary blend. If you look at almost any supplement out there, there's something on the back that says proprietary blend. And the FDA, actually, there was a senator in Utah where they make 80% of supplements or something in the U.S. is all out of Utah, and they actually lobbied the government that the FDA doesn't have to approve the supplement before it's released. The FDA actually has to work
after.
They have to work to prove that it's unsafe. So it's not like you have to prove that it's safe to the FDA. They have to prove it's unsafe. That's the FDA. Canada does it a little bit different. In the documentary, it's funny. He goes to one of these supplement companies, and he's like, "What's this stuff?" And he's like, "Oh, that's the Canadian recipe of whatever they were making, because there's a lot of stuff in there that Canada outlaws." And trust me, the good supplements are down in the States. Like they got
for
completely unregulated. You will piss hot if you're an athlete. Do not take American supplements. You'll piss hot, and if you're an elite athlete, you will test positive. But again, it's these proprietary blends. Basically, you can just say, like, you can put, let's say it's 1,000 milligram, 1 gram pill.
Right.
You can put 3 grains of creatine in it and say that it's a proprietary, and the rest is rice flour, and you can say that it's a creatine pill because there's technically creatine in it, but they don't say how much, and because it's so unregulated, there's no daily values. You don't know how much you should take. Blah 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 blah. Right. So the supplement industry is wildly underregulated.
I really feel like there's not a way to like show as well. Like there's not like a proper foundation of how to take these supplements or drugs or like testosterone. No. So those who have tried it and have done it have just gone wacky. Experiments gone wrong.
Or it's gym bros, guys saying, yeah, man, just inject it and just go for it.
And now they're cases of the image of what that is.
Big time. And again, those are the stories you hear in the news. That's the propaganda that's being pushed because we can't say, like, because it's almost like the American dream only works if you're asleep. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing with them is like there's this weird delusion that, again, at least there's some sports. At least we can go watch the game. We can put our crazy life aside at least for an hour and a half or 3 hours or whatever and watch a baseball game, watch a football game, get lost in it, learn these guys that you're never going to meet and never going to know who they are. And just, again, people need something to idolize and look up to and strive towards and try to be like. So we want to preserve these athletes' sanctity. We want to preserve the illusion that these athletes are perfect, even though they're just like you and I and everybody. They just happen to be unbelievably talented, and they're being celebrated for it, which is totally fine. I'm not saying don't celebrate athletes, but the fact is they're definitely deified in our culture. They're up there, right? Celebrities, movie stars, athletes. They're all in that same category. And it's like, this is why we can't, or most people can't accept the fact that they're even using these steroids, right? Because it's like, it just shatters the dream, right? So, kind of in closing, people want to see bigger than life athletes. They want to see these people go out and do these tremendous feats of athleticism and break records and do this and that. And movie stars looking dieseled and shredded and beautiful and everyone looking unreal. But they just don't want to know how they got there. Don't tell me how. I don't want to know why. I just want to appreciate it. But the fact is, a lot of these people out there are again doing what it takes. I'm not saying that this is bad. It's just, again, we need to understand that we put these people on a pedestal and we strive to be like them, but we need to understand that they are just like you and I, and they are a reflection of us. That we can look at these people and we can appreciate that, and we can say, wow, isn't life amazing? Isn't someone that's just like you and me and has the same issues can do something like this, and you can live vicariously through that, and you can be happy that they're part of that same collective unconscious that you're part of, and even in some little way you can share in those accomplishments together, which is beautiful. And that's sport, and that's the magic of all of it, right? But again, people are juicing, people are doing what it takes to get to the next level, and sometimes it's hard to swallow, but at the same time, you just gotta appreciate it for what it is. And maybe one day we'll have just a steroid Olympics, and guys will pull their arms off in deadlift competition and stuff because they'll be trying to deadlift 3,000 pounds and stuff, and it'll be great, and we'll love it and we'll cheer. And maybe these Myostatin athletes are going to start coming out, guys, double muscle, just like pure gladiator moves and stuff. Again, we didn't even talk about that. That's deep root stuff, right? We just want to see the man in the arena, right? We want to see that person who steps in front of everyone and just is our champion. We love that. So, go out there, try and find, your favorite actor, your favorite celebrity. Learn a little bit more about them, see what they're doing, see what it takes to truly do this, and and just know that, you know, it's something that we want to idolize, but it's something that, you know, it takes a certain person to really get to that level, for sure. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Love ya. If you want to go check out all the podcast doings, Twitter, Instagram, we got it all down on the YouTube links there. Hit the bell on YouTube, get all those notifications so you know when our next video drops. And yeah, like and rate the podcast. Tell your friends. We love you. Get out there, do steroids. See ya.